Part 71. A Middle School Cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 703. The human mind lacks the ability to connect known things. This is actually the kindest thing in the world. Human beings are like living on a small island called ignorance in the dark ocean. Although the ocean is vast and contains endless secrets, we should not sail too far or explore too deep, because you never know what is in the ocean. What's in it? In short, the entire world is full of malice towards humans, and every exploration by humans is seeking death. Listening to the words that a certain middle-class cartoonist said that contained dark and depressing philosophy, Yoshida first confirmed that he had not gone wrong, and then began to express his feelings to the person on the phone who was talking to a certain middle-class cartoonist. Extreme sympathy. Because Yoshida can see that at this moment, a certain middle-level cartoonist is trying to use theoretical indoctrination to erode the spirit of the caller on the other side of the phone. Yes, that's it. May your martial arts fortune be prosperous. El Sai Congruo. It's, teacher Eiji Niizuma. Although he used a questioning tone, Yoshida was very sure that the person on the other side of the phone was his new wife Eiji, who is also a manga artist. In today's world, perhaps there are only those who can withstand the erosion of the thoughts of a middle-class manga artist. It's just Eiji Shinzuma, right? Of course, Rina cannot be considered a human being, but should be classified into the category of a legendary camp-like witch. My beloved cat, sometimes murder and silence incidents occur. What is the reason? You should be aware of it, right? Makoto Takahashi squinted his eyes and stared at Yoshida for a long time, before almost killing him after a certain editor was so frightened that he ran away. He quietly said, "But forget it this time, after all, I am summoning you in person. But next time, Hey, thank you to the great lord of the Phoenix Academy for letting me go." Yoshida sat down while reading Stress Reaction with a strong desire for survival and writing flattery to a certain middle-level manga artist. On the sofa, he asked expectantly, "So Chang, you specifically called me over today and said you wanted to discuss comics with me. Has the progress of the serialization now reached that divine plot twist?" "My beloved cat, you have finally made some progress." A certain second-grade cartoonist had an expression of "I am very pleased," and in exchange, of course, a responsible editor used the dead fish eyes to send out contemptuous gaze. As the second test subject for the twisting plot of The Observation God, my familiar cat, you will have to give me a review of no less than 1,000 words later. I won't talk about my thoughts after reading it for now. Yoshida, who originally got the manga manuscript, heard something that made him very concerned before he could read it. As the editor-in-chief of the Manga Steins Gate, I am actually not the first person to see the comic manuscript. Cheng, the first person to see this manga manuscript, is indeed Mr. Eiji Niizuma, right? Stupid question. In response to Yoshida's slightly resentful questioning, a certain middle-class cartoonist unceremoniously fought back. As a being who can form an alliance with the Great Phoenix Academy, it is natural that we should enjoy equal treatment. Oh, I don't want to say anything anymore. Yoshida, who no longer wanted to reprimand Makoto Takahashi for his too casual attitude, rarely reacted as fiercely as before. Maybe I can understand some of the quirks of you monster geniuses. And the more important reason is that neither Chen nor Mr. Eiji Niizuma have the professionalism that a cartoonist should have, and they will never do such despicable people without a bottom line. Oh, my beloved cat, although what you just said is very good. A certain middle-level cartoonist looked at Yoshida with squinted eyes, and a joyful smile suddenly appeared on his face. But the good friends Akin Mumenjai and the little sea otter will be very sad when they hear this. Those guys have always regarded you as a reliable and trustworthy person on the editorial side. The responsible editor. Huh? Forget it, here American. Yoshida narrowed his eyes and stared at Takahashi Makoto, and asked suspiciously, "Isn't the person whom Ajumu Menha-sensei trusts the most, the one who has the title of strategist in the editorial department? Hattori-san. Bang, a certain middle-level cartoonist who was suddenly dissatisfied for some reason suddenly spat and began to urge Yoshida to read the manga manuscript. My beloved cat, hurry up and start your work. Hey. It was rare for a certain middle-class cartoonist to feel frustrated, and Yoshida felt very pleasant because of this. However, unfortunately, this pleasant mood did not last too long, and then he noticed that a certain middle-class cartoonist, after the cartoonist's strange behavior, the uneasy feeling that originated from his soul made Yoshida unable to help but speak. I said, Chen, what are you planning to do? Huh? Can't you even see this? Of course I'm recording your expression, my beloved cat. Gently tapping the video equipment that had been set up, a certain middle school cartoonist looked like a matter of course and answered like this. After all, according to the rules of equivalent exchange, as the privilege of getting the second observer of the manga manuscript, my beloved cat, you must also pay the price of letting the Phoenix Academy murderer feel pleasure, right? As long as you are happy, Chen. Is it because he was convinced by the good and powerful reason of a certain Chuyuni cartoonist, or because he knew that he could not stop the other party's behavior even if he persuaded him? In short, after Yoshida sighed helplessly, he ignored the Chuyuni cartoonist who was tossing around. Because Yoshida was already looking forward to observing the comic draft that was said to have a divine twist plot. Since the appearance of the tsundere female character Maka's Kurisu, her position in the comic has gradually replaced Mayuri, the childhood sweetheart of the original male protagonist Okabe Rintaro. As the comic unfolds, this also made Yoshida, who likes this cute girl, complain to a certain Chuyuni cartoonist several times. The content of this comic draft in Yoshida's hand was not much different from the previous serialization. It was still Okabe Rintaro's various Chuyuni, Maka's Kurisu's various tsunderes, Mayuri's various cuteness, and Hashida's various moral integrity. It seemed to have nothing to do with the divine twist plot mentioned by a certain Chuyuni cartoonist. However, Yoshida did not rush to question the middle school manga artist, but patiently watched carefully. As the editor-in-chief who has observed many comics, Yoshida is very clear that many seemingly bland plots, if suddenly there is a magic twist plot, it is very likely that a comic that is only popular level will be pushed to the category of classic or even masterpiece. Let's not talk about other cartoonists. The comics that a middle school cartoonist has serialized over the years are basically like this. Yoshida, who continued to observe the comic manuscripts, finally found a slightly more serious plot, or, the introduction to the upcoming magic twist plot. In the comics, although Okabe Rintaro and others have successfully changed many things in the past after many experiments of sending information to the past D-mail, this does not mean that time travel is completed. Just like in reality, any scientific research related to humans must carry out a key step that is controversial from beginning to end before it is officially completed, that is human experiment. However, for a small group like the Future Tool Research Institute headed by Okabe Rintaro, conducting human experiments is simply an impossible task, so, after Okabe Rintaro and Maka's Kurisu had a debate, they finally decided to hand over the experimental results to the relevant institutions for further research the next day. The following is a daily plot that is like a flood. The small team of the Future Tool Research Institute plans to hold a celebration banquet. Although it looks very second year, it is quite mature at the critical moment. Yoshida's eyes wandered back and forth between the comics and a certain second-year cartoonist. I don't know if he was praising the crazy scientist Hao Winkuma in the comics? Or was he complaining about the crazy cartoonist Hao Winkuma in reality? Yoshida continued to observe the comic manuscript, and finally saw the beginning of the divine twist plot in the celebration banquet. Ah! Mayuri's pocket watch stopped. How strange, it was just wound up. That's right, after the cute Mayuri said this, the plot of the whole comic began to enter the rhythm of divine twists. It's just a meeting notice of about 200 words, and a certain cat has revised it 27 times today. Not to mention punctuation and fonts, I actually struggled more than 10 times over the choice of words such as and or with. Is there a difference between the two terms XX department and XX department, XX department and XX department? Boss, what I wrote is not a document that can change the fate of the world and determine the life and death of mankind, but a notice for a meeting of internal staff arranged by a department. I finished writing it in 10 minutes, and was disliked for writing too fast and not seriously. I revised it repeatedly for a day, and was complained about procrastination. Alas, I won't complain anymore, otherwise I will be said to have an inadequate attitude. A certain cat is tired. Dear readers, please rest early, good night. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist email. Chapter 704. Yoshida stopped flipping through the manga manuscript. Not because I have finished reading the manga, but because the plot changes in the manga Steins Gate are so exciting. Dead, his face was dull, and Yoshida's eyes were full of confusion, as if he was talking in a dream. He seemed to be trying to seek confirmation from a middle-class cartoonist, and seemed to be persuading himself to believe what he saw. Mayuri is dead. Eh? My beloved cat, what are you talking about? How could Mayuri die? A middle-level cartoonist expressed extreme surprise at the words of a responsible editor. Yesterday, I had a whole day discussion with Lyose on the topic of should the main palace choose to be tsundere or cute, and judging from the information revealed in Lyose's words, the guy finally chose Mayu by visual inspection. The possibility is higher. Tisk, the reason why the eldest lady loses is because she is usually too arrogant, right? Although it is very cute in terms of attributes, it is tsundere. Attributes can also easily become obstacles to emotional development. I'm talking about the comics, forget it. A chicken talks like a duck, that's probably how Yoshida feels at this moment. What he was talking about was obviously a character related to the plot of the comic Steins Gate, but a certain middle-class cartoonist inexplicably brought the topic to another cartoonist and his assistant. Well, even though they have the same identity as an assistant, the same cute attributes, and the same name, comics are comics and reality is reality, so, for a certain middle-grade cartoonist who switches fantasy to reality ability, Yoshida expressed his resignation. Mayuri from the manga Steins Gate. Oh, my beloved cat, you wish you had just said Tujalug. Then Chen, what do you think we are going to say? Looking at Chen Takahashi's suddenly enlightened look, Yoshida suddenly had the urge to ask himself 3 questions of heart beating. Is Mayuri in the manga really dead? From a biological point of view, Mayuri is just on the verge of death. For Yoshida, who was in a state of confusion, a certain second-year cartoonist's face revealed the so-called preacher who can forgive all sins and redeem all sufferings. The smile of the scholar, after a slight cough, slowly said, "Ahem, my beloved cat, as a human being, it is natural that you do not understand death well. According to the traditional concept, human beings' permanent cessation of heartbeat and breathing is a sign of death. The currently recognized medical concept uses brainstem death as the standard for brain death. Once brain death occurs, it means a person's substantial and functional death. At least in my dependent cat this is the standard of the superficial world of survival. However, in our inner world, the word death mentioned refers to the soul breaking away from the bondage of the body and leaving this world. Chen. Yoshida, who was suddenly fed a lot of information, finally got rid of the shackles of the dazed state, raised his head and stared at a certain second-grade cartoonist for a long time, and then said helplessly, "When we talk about comic manuscripts, can we speak human language?" Okay. To put it simply, in the manga manuscript you saw, Mayuri is indeed dead. Looking at Yoshida, who was about to go berserk, a certain second-year manga artist waved his hand and signaled to the other party to listen patiently. Then continued in a calm tone, "But in the next chapter, Mayuri, let's not talk about it." Huh? No more talking. All the appetizing guys deserve to die. At this moment, Yoshida really wanted to punch to death the middle-level cartoonist wearing a white coat, if he could beat him. What about that, my familiar cat? You should also know the consequences of spoilers. Looking at Yoshida's gloomy expression, a certain middle-level cartoonist spread his hands helplessly, and the smile on his face slowly faded, and then the switch became a heavy warning. Wait a minute. My belonging is cat, you must have done it on purpose, right? Deliberately tricking me into spoiling the sequel of the comic to you, so that I would fall into a desperate situation. Tisk tisk tisk, my belonging is cat, I didn't expect it. You are such a scheming editor. I misjudged you. I know whether I did it on purpose or not. For a certain middle-class cartoonist who was already preparing to change the topic, the editor-in-chief of a certain weekly was very vigilant and prepared to force the topic to stay on comics-related topics. But Chen, I can now confirm that you designed the plot of Mayuri's death absolutely on purpose. Yes, faced with the question from the editor-in-chief of a certain weekly, a middle-grade cartoonist nodded seriously and admitted. Chen, you. Yoshida took a deep breath, his eyes filled with indescribable loss, and asked helplessly, the divine twist plot you have been talking about, is it to let Mei reason for death? That's right. Readers who have always thought that Steins Gate is a calm daily manga, after getting used to the daily plot, suddenly there is such a super powerful twist. He looked at Yoshida with squinted eyes. A middle-level cartoonist with a proud look on his face said, this kind of plot development model that exceeds readers' expectations, can't it be called a divine twist? I did not deny the statement of a certain Chuyuni cartoonist, because Yoshida, as the editor-in-chief, was also surprised by the amazing development of the comic plot just now, although it is indeed a bit unacceptable from a personal emotional point of view. Yoshida also admitted that it was because of Mayuri's sudden death that he was looking forward to the content of the next episode. Although what you said makes sense, Chen, this is not the focus now, right? However, a certain editor-in-chief said that there are still many doubts. Speaking of Chen, tell me honestly, the reason why you chose to let Mayuri die so abruptly in the comics is not just to complete your so-called magic twist plot, right? In order to highlight the change of the plot, some characters are killed. This routine often appears in both novels and comics, so Yoshida can understand it, but comics like Steins Gate that serialize various daily life in the early stage actually use this routine. This is what Yoshida cannot accept. So Yoshida has sufficient reason to suspect that this is something that a certain Chuyuni cartoonist did deliberately. After all, with the ability of a certain Chuyuni cartoonist to create plots, there is no need to use such a low-end method to complete the plot twist. Tisk. My beloved cat, I told you not to spoil the plot. The Chuyuni cartoonist turned his head and muttered unsatisfiedly, and, tisk tisk, with your wisdom, my beloved cat, you can't understand it at all without spoiling it, okay. I'm really sorry for my low wisdom, unable to know the hidden meaning of the comic plot, and by the way, he didn't have his own cartoonist to complain and despise. Yoshida was completely doubly depressed at the moment. Hey, Chen, just give me a little hint. Hint? Anyway. Since you, my cat, still don't give up, then. After sighing helplessly, a middle school cartoonist closed his eyes and thought for a moment before speaking faintly, it's not that I don't want to say it, but I can't say it. Weekly editor Yoshida had the urge to flip the table at this moment. What the hell is this hint, damn it? I haven't seen Chu Da. Cough cough, Yoshida, respect yourself. See. My cat, I told you that you can't understand. Looking at the weekly editor with a frown on his face, a certain Chuyunibaka cartoonist spread his hands innocently. Considering your IQ, my cat, I'll give you another hint. Let me make it clear, this is the last time I'll give you a hint. The premise is, Chen, you can say something that normal people can understand. The editor gritted his teeth and threatened with a slightly fierce tone. Then my cat. Not caring about the attitude of his editor, a certain Chuyunabaku cartoonist smiled with a name of joy. Just wait and observe the next chapter of the comic. Ha 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 ha. If you want to know the subsequent content of the comic, directly observing the next chapter of the comic is the most direct, so, in a sense, this hint from a certain Chuyunabaku cartoonist is not wrong. But unfortunately, this is not what Yoshida wants. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist email. Chapter 705. Mayuri, these are the manga manuscripts to be completed this week. The cold and handsome man Shizuka put the manga manuscript in his right hand on Mayuri's desk. The favor in his eyes flashed away, and then he hugged the remaining comics. After reading the manuscript, he turned around and came to Ueno Aoi. Aoi, I'll leave the rest of the manga manuscript to you. Yeah, Ryu-chan, leave it to Mayuri. Although he may show a cute side in daily life, Mayuri is a very reliable companion when she works as a cartoonist's assistant. For Mayuri, who can not only act cute, but also have a very reliable execution ability at critical moments, if it weren't for the fact that a certain middle-class cartoonist was full of bad taste and wanted to wait for the Shura field between cartoonist assistants, this would be awesome. The assistant will never give up to Jing Hee. This amount of manga manuscripts. Looking at the manga manuscripts on the table, Miss Aoi Ueno glanced at Shizuka without leaving any trace. Before the other party could react, she raised her head proudly. It will be completed within this week. Right? Huh. Easy. Sorry, Aoi, Mayuri, I've worked hard on you during this time. Jing Hee, who knew very well the workload of the two assistants, a trace of apology flashed on his face. If it hadn't been because I had a cold before, thank you both for your time of care. Ryu-chan, you're a real man, Mayuri comforted Shizuka softly, showing a smile that was as effective as healing wave. Compared to Cheng's place before, this amount of manga manuscripts is just a piece of cake, because the mention of a certain existence attracted Jing Hee's attention. Miss Aoi Ueno's eyes flashed with a hint of joy. Then under the gaze of the other party, he pretended to be reserved and hummed, Jing Hee-kun, as the cartoonist's assistant, it is your duty to assist the cartoonist in completing the cartoon manuscript. There is no need for you to apologize or thank you. And in your case I'm taking care of you while you're having a cold. I just want you to recover quickly and resume serialization as soon as possible. I'm not taking care of you for any special reason. Yeah, I know. Although after experiencing the guidance, teaching, of a certain middle school cartoonist, Jing Hee will no longer treat everyone around him indifferently like when he first debuted, but the reason why habits are called habits is because some things do not matter. No matter how many corrections are made, it cannot be changed, just like Shizuo he is now doing to Miss Aoi Ueno who is in the tsundere state. Although her heart is full of gratitude, she doesn't know how to express it. By the way, Jing Hee was not influenced by a certain middle-class cartoonist and embarked on the path of finding happiness. Should this be said to be something worth celebrating? Or should I say it is a regrettable thing? Hey, Ryu-chan, has Ryu-chan thought about the ending of the manga assassination? Mayuri, who was working on the manga manuscript, suddenly stopped painting, tilted her head and asked Shizuka, Ryu-chan before. Didn't I say that because of something, I suddenly got some inspiration and planned the ending of the manga in advance? Meiji said very curiously. Because of something, Miss Aoi Ueno's suspicious eyes wandered back and forth between Shizuka and Mayuri. Those eyes were full of the suspicion and vigilance that a wife would have when she sees her husband sitting with a female classmate drinking coffee. Jing Hee-kun, can you tell me specifically, what exactly is something? Well, actually what Miss Aoi Ueno wants to ask is about the relationship between Shizuoka and Mayuri. Everyone knows it. Teacher, the manga Steins Gate currently being serialized by Phoenix and Kuma Sensei will be the last serialized manga in the teacher's career as a manga artist, although Shizuka's tone was full of calmness, but both Mayuri and Ueno Aoi can feel the confusion and uneasiness in Shizuohi's heart. To be honest, when I heard the news from Hattori-san, I couldn't believe it at all. But then I called the teacher for confirmation. Shizuka stopped abruptly in the middle of speaking, and then his eyes began to wander between Ueno Aoi and Mayuri. "Shizu-kun, why are you?" Seeing Shizu's hesitant expression, Miss Aoi Ueno reacted immediately after hesitating for a moment and said viciously, "Could it be that guy Takahashi Makoto? Did you say something incomprehensible again?" "No, it's nothing." "Boy, please don't turn your head away when you lie, think back to what you learned when you were an intern at a middle school cartoonist." "Huh? Is that so?" The so-called tsundere will not face what she wants to know calmly, so she was unwilling to tell herself when she saw Shiji River. Although she was a little dissatisfied, Miss Aoi Ueno still resisted the urge to ask further and changed the topic. "Okay. So, Jing-hee-kun, can you tell us, what do you think about the ending of the comic Assassination? Is it going to end like the previous genre in a way that is unacceptable to readers? It shouldn't be, right?" Probably, thinking of the ending he had set with his sudden burst of inspiration, Jing-hee hesitated for a moment and answered with some uncertainty, "After hearing the news from Hattori-san, I called the teacher again to confirm. After the phone call ended, the ending of the comic Assassination came naturally." "Oh, this is probably Sei-chan silently guarding Ryu-chan." "Yeah, that's it," Mayuri narrowed her eyes and said with great certainty. "Shizugawa-kun, wait a minute." Miss Aoi Ueno, who was quite familiar with a certain middle school manga artist, looked at Shizukawa with worry on her face. "You are sure that the ending of the manga was constructed by yourself after careful consideration? And not because it was done hastily after being brainwashed by that guy Aiken's strange radio waves? Eh? Why do you doubt the teacher?" Jing-hee looked at Miss Aoi Ueno strangely. "Teacher, you won't interfere with my comics. And the content of my chat with the teacher has nothing to do with the comics." "No, that's exactly why I'm worried." It was Miss Aoi Ueno who was obviously her assistant, but she actually taught Shizukawa a lesson as a cartoonist. As expected, tsundere can provide enhancement to the so-called aura. Get results. I'm really familiar with that guy Aiken. What he likes to do most is to drag others into his own rhythm through various daily chats, so that others can accept his own thoughts without knowing it. That's not true, Aoi." In response to Miss Aoi Ueno's complaints, Shizuka gently shook her head. "To me, teachers are very remarkable beings. You actually have such thoughts." Hearing the admiration flowing out of Jing-hee's words, Miss Aoi Ueno helplessly shook her head and sighed. "Jing-hee-kun, this proves that your thoughts have been influenced by that guy Aiken. It's eroded. When I was imagining this assassination, the prototype of Koro-sensei was actually based on some of the teacher's daily images." Jing-hee turned the brush with his fingers and looked at the painting of a certain octopus on the table. The tone of the cartoon manuscript suddenly became a little disappointed. "When I heard that the teacher would retire soon, I felt a little confused at first, but after talking with the teacher on the phone, I suddenly realized something brutal truth." The cruel truth. Is this statement too exaggerated?" The corner of her mouth twitched inexplicably, and Miss Aoi Ueno suddenly had the illusion that I am facing a certain middle-class manga artist. After serializing the last comic, and then giving up the career of cartoonist. Jing-hee looked at his two assistants helplessly, his tone full of helplessness. "Doesn't this mean that teacher, cartoonist will Phoenix Academy Judge Hendai in the near future?" Although in a sense, what Jing-hee said is not wrong, it still sounds a bit strange. And with this weird way of thinking, should he be called a master and a disciple? So, compared with Shizukawa's statement cursing the death of a certain middle school manga artist, Miss Aoi Ueno is more concerned about another thing. "Jing-hee-kun, could the ending of the manga Assassination be Well, Koro-sensei died in the end. Eh? That's a lie, how could it be possible? When Oaoi looked at Shizuka in disbelief and shouted excitedly, according to the setting in the manga, it's impossible for anyone to kill Koro-sensei, right? Why is Koro-sensei still dead? Koro-sensei died at the hands of the student he was most satisfied with. Jinghe suddenly looked away from the window and whispered, actually, Koro-sensei should be considered a suicide, just like the teacher, he just chose a way that others don't understand. That's all. Master Dior chose to give up being a human being, which is actually considered suicide. To be honest, sometimes when we choose to give up, it actually means killing certain possibilities in the future. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist Mao. Chapter 706. Mayoshi's pocket watch has stopped, it's really weird, it was wound up just now. For Yoshida, this sentence is the beginning of a dramatic plot twist in the comic Steins Gate. For readers, it is the beginning of the plot becoming sadistic. For a certain middle-class cartoonist, it is the ending. The beginning of the performance, but for the male protagonist in the manga, Phoenix Academy Kuma, it is the beginning of his maturity and transformation. What is needed to allow people to grow up in a short period of time, from the innocent infancy of middle school to a reliable and sensible maturity? Is it the precipitation of time? Also the accumulation of experience? Or is it an increase in knowledge? No, these may all promote human growth, but it is difficult to make people mature in a short period of time. What really makes people mature is responsibility. Let's not mention the hero of the manga Steins Gate, Humane Homa, but let's take the hero of the manga Gintama, Jintoki Sakata, that person who is recognized as reliable and worthy of being trusted on the battlefield. Readers who have read the manga Gintama must know what kind of virtue the silver-haired natural curly man had when he first appeared in the manga. I live heartlessly all day long. Except for working during the day, I spend the rest of my time wandering around, reading comics and playing steel balls, and getting drunk in various ways at night. I guess many readers, when they were very young, have you ever been taught by an adult that you should never live like this useless person? Kneeling is the current status of life. Many people have to do this in order to live. Even the silver-haired natural curler is the same in this regard, so there is no need to feel inferior and depressed because of it, but when you really face it, you should stick to your own bottom line and principles. At this time, how many people can be like the silver-haired warrior, firmly holding the sword called Guardian in their hearts, fighting for the bottom line and principles, and fighting for their unyielding will and soul? So, when those who were educated in various ways of shaping their three views when they were young, they will find out after they really enter the society that they want to live like Sakata Jintoki, want to live like that naturally curly silver hair. Really it's not that difficult. That seemingly unruly silver-haired man with naturally curly hair, no matter how difficult his life was still able to struggle forward in the quagmire of despair and darkness. Perhaps what supported Sakata Jintoki was that he promised Mr. Shoyo at that time. That agreement? Help me take care of them. This is the responsibility that Sakata Jintoki has spent the rest of his life shouldering after he agreed. Rintaro Okabe in the manga Steins Gate, or the arrogant scientist Kuma from the Phoenix Institute, truly shows his charm as a male protagonist when he takes on the responsibility of saving Mayuri. In the early stages of the comic series, Rintaro's various words and deeds made this guy in a white coat who calls himself King Chi's scientist Phoenix Academy fierce look quite unreliable and not worth entrusting his back to. Comrade. Especially when Mayuri hinted many times that studying experiments like D-Male made her very uneasy and worried. Although Rintaro had hesitation and entanglement, he quickly put it behind him and devoted himself to various projects. Under experiment. But when Mayuri was shot and killed, Rintaro finally stopped being a middle-aged man and was no longer as wild and wanton as before. Watching Mayuri being shot, Rintaro truly saw the cruelty of reality and held Mayuri in his arms. Lee cried like a child. Although the editor-in-chief of a certain weekly magazine once complained about it, a certain middle-class cartoonist actually gave the male protagonist a close-up in a rather wicked way, but it is undeniable that there is such a divine twist in this sentence. The plot is quite shocking for readers. Especially in the comics, when facing the personnel dispatched by the agency, Rentaro shed his usual almost arrogant disguise, apologized and admitted his mistake, and tried to save Mayuri's fate of being processed through his submission. What really sticks in the reader's minds in this scene is not the contrast between the murderous behavior of the mad scientist Phoenix Institute before and after, but the determination to give up everything for the safety of his childhood sweetheart. After witnessing his childhood sweetheart being killed in front of him, Rentaro did not completely lose his mind and went up to fight the armed enemy with his bare hands. Instead, he resolutely and decisively used the machine that was still in the experimental stage to send messages to himself in the past time period, trying to get his past self to interfere with Mayuri's destined death. What is gratifying is that Rentaro did it and allowed himself to return to the past, back to the time when Mayuri had not yet died. But it is also unfortunate that Rentaro was not able to save Mayuri from her inevitable ending. Mayoshi's pocket watch has stopped. It's really strange, it was wound up just now. When Mayuri's words sounded again in the manga, Rentaro already had an ominous premonition, but before Rentaro could make any reaction, Mayuri died in the next second. This time Mayuri was not shot to death like last time, but she also entered the destined ending of death. Maybe many people will understand this seemingly destined ending. Are you feeling desperate? But Rentaro did not give up. Instead, he once again used the experimental machine to go back to the past and try again. His character is no longer average, and when faced with difficulties, he doesn't just know how to cowardly escape, but chooses to act resolutely and courageously. When Rentaro takes on the responsibility of "I must save Mayuri," the entire comic the rhythm has also become inexplicably passionate. Of course, for the readers who are observing the comics, and for the editor of a certain weekly who uses his status as editor to observe the comic drafts in advance every week, they also fall into endless nightmares when they feel the passionate plot. Mayoshi's pocket watch has stopped. It's really strange, it was wound up just now. This line of dialogue, whether it is Yoshida, the editor-in-chief of the weekly, or all readers of the manga Steins Gate, is like the key to unlocking nightmares, because this line appears in all comics dialogue. The next plot must be when Mayuri gets her lunch. This also means that Rentaro's hard work this time has failed. He left the city alone with Mayuri and hid in a place where no one could find him. It can be said that Taro had tried almost everything he could think of, but in the end he still couldn't save Mayuri from her destined fate of death. This makes Rentaro very painful. Likewise, this also makes readers feel very depressed. Because of the recent serialization, Mayuri's death dialogue will appear in basically every episode, and then it will be announced that Rentaro's series of hard attempts have failed. This kind of plot development is very powerful. In other words, this kind of plot development is very imaginative, and it is indeed very interesting. After reading the manga manuscript, Yoshida experienced the nightmare again, and looked at a certain middle-level cartoonist with some depression. He complained, but if the plots of subsequent comic series are similar, it will make readers feel bored. As a comic serialized in the weekly Shonen Jump, if the protagonist's actions keep failing, it will not be good for the entire series. As far as comics are concerned, this is quite a fatal flaw. But don't you also enjoy reading My Familiar Cat? A certain second-grade cartoonist complained without raising his head, and continued to draw the cartoon manuscript while saying, "But My Familiar Cat, you just rest assured. This comic will definitely not continue like this." Yes, after all, this comic. Are you going to say something like the final performance must be perfect? Before Yoshida could say anything, a middle-level cartoonist put his brush aside and complained unceremoniously, Hey, my beloved cat, can you give me another reason? I've heard this excuse no less than 500 times. What I want to say is actually. Yoshida hesitated for a moment, and then, under the joking eyes of a middle-class cartoonist, he boasted in a highly commercial way, after all, Aiken, your comic, will be a masterpiece that will convince Mr. A.G. Niizuma to lose. Obviously, the words of the editor-in-chief of a certain weekly magazine, are definitely made up. It seems that Yoshida tried very hard to prevent a certain middle-class manga artist from complaining, from a visual inspection. The contents of this chapter are just the feelings of a certain cat, because a certain cat likes Shirayasha, and a certain cat likes Jujhen who works hard for Mayuri, the above. A middle school cartoonist. Author, Mao-do SD email. Chapter 707. No matter what the form of expression is, in any work, what can move people is actually the creator's expression of the rare emotions and bonds between people in reality on the characters. In short, in addition to the character attributes and various background settings of a work, what is more important is the creator's reliance on the pure emotional bonds of human beings. Just like collecting 7 Dragon Balls can summon a dragon, when a work collects the attributes of the characters, the background settings and the pure emotional bonds, and the compatibility between the three is good, then this work, no matter what form it is presented in, can undoubtedly be pushed to the altar and regarded as a masterpiece. So, in the work Steins Gate, apart from the addition of various character attributes, what really makes the work outstanding, in addition to its core butterfly effect and world line convergence theory, is naturally the pure emotions and bonds between Rentaro and the members of the Future Tool Research Institute. However, it is a bit regrettable that, judging from the content currently being serialized, the plot that truly shows the emotional bond between Rentaro and the members of the Future Gadgets Research Institute will probably take some time to wait. At least, the weekly editors who have priority observation rights at this stage have not seen such a plot, or in other words, they have not noticed that the plot will develop in this direction. Of course, it does not mean that everyone is unaware. For example, a cartoonist who was originally drawing a comic, after receiving a new issue of the weekly from his editor-in-chief, immediately threw the half-drawn comic aside and began to look through the weekly in his hand carefully. I really think so. Nizuma Eiji, who was almost burying his head in the weekly, suddenly stopped looking through the comics and fell into a daze. Nizuma-kun, why don't you give me the comic that needs to be serialized this week first? It is obvious that Nizuma Eiji is thinking seriously about something, so Yojiro asked the question so cautiously. After all, for many cartoonists, the most annoying thing is to be interrupted when they are thinking. Mr. Hao Winkuma is really amazing. What was beyond Yojiro's expectation was that after brewing for a long time, Eiji Nizuma only praised a certain Chuyuni cartoonist, and then continued to observe the serialized comics, and there was no follow-up. Yojiro had a black question mark face, not knowing how to continue communicating with Eiji Nizuma. After all, as the editor-in-chief of Eiji Nizuma, Yojiro knew very well that whenever Eiji Nizuma was immersed in the comics, no matter what he asked or said, it was like he was out of service area, and he would not get any response at all. So the only thing Yojiro could do at this moment was to wait for Eiji Nizuma silently, wait until Eiji Nizuma finished reading the serialized comics and found his lost soul from focus mode. In addition to collecting the comic manuscripts, Yojiro also wanted to ask Eiji Nizuma why the comic Steins Gate that he observed was just an average one, but was highly evaluated by Eiji Nizuma. Yes, that was Yojiro's original plan, but unfortunately, Eiji Nizuma's behavior was a little abnormal today. After silently reading the Steins Gate comic serialized in this issue of the weekly magazine, Eiji Nizuma did not communicate with Yojiro as a cartoonist as usual, nor did he take out the task item serial comic manuscript that Yojiro needed. Instead, he suddenly jumped down from the chair, quickly took out the weekly magazine that was released not long ago from the bookshelf, and entered focus mode again to observe silently. "Hey, Nizuma-kun, what are you doing today?" Yojiro, who noticed that Eiji Nizuma's behavior was abnormal, finally couldn't help but want to ask, but when his eyes accidentally swept over what Eiji Nizuma was observing, Yujiro was suddenly stunned. Because Yujiro suddenly discovered that what Eiji Nizuma was observing at this time was the first chapter of the manga Steins Gate when it was first serialized. Yujiro-san, before, Winkuma told me that the first chapter of this manga is the ending of the whole manga. After re-observing the plot of the first chapter of the manga Steins Gate, Eiji Nizuma took the initiative to speak without waiting for Yujiro to ask, but no matter how I look at it, I can't imagine how to hide the ending in the first chapter. Isn't it a flashback? Yujiro saw the painted poster of the male protagonist in Hero Academia on the wall, and speculated a little uncertainly, otherwise, I can't think of how to put the ending of a manga in the very beginning. Flashback. Yujiro-san is really an idiot, although Eiji Nizuma does not have superb acting skills like a certain Chuyunabaku manga artist, showing almost exaggerated contempt on his face, but the sarcasm in Eiji Nizuma's tone is still obvious. Yujiro-san, have you carefully read this new series by Winkuma-sensei? Have you carefully analyzed the possible pattern of the plot? Have you carefully studied every line and narration that Winkuma-sensei inserted into the comic? Yujiro-san, you have no idea how powerful Winkuma-sensei is. The three almost brutal questions, coupled with the increasingly loud voice of Nizuma Eiji, made Yujiro, the editor-in-chief, lower his head like a child who had done something wrong and began to move back, but Yujiro only took 2 steps and immediately reacted. It's not right. Why should I, as the editor-in-chief, be scolded by the cartoonist like a child? I should be the one who plays the role of the scolder. When Mr. Winkuma serialized the comic, he definitely didn't use the flashback method. Yes. I can be sure that he definitely didn't say it. If important things have to be said 3 times, then Nizuma Eiji, who only repeated it twice, just wanted to prove his point to Yujiro. So, Nizuma-kun, do you understand, is this the difference between a genius cartoonist and a slightly talented editor-in-chief? Yujiro, the editor-in-chief of a certain weekly magazine, sighed narcissistically. What a pity. Not really, he stated it very calmly. Is it worthy of Eiji Nizuma's style? Yujiro suddenly felt that Nizuma you have changed, maybe it was an illusion? Although I didn't fully understand it, I may have understood it a little through the content of today's serialized episode. Nizuma Eiji looked at the 2 weekly magazines on the table, his eyes flickered, and there was a little loss and unwillingness in his tone, but it is precisely because I understand it, Yujiro-san, I will probably lose the last duel with Mr. Winkuma. Lose? No way. Yujiro felt as if he had hallucinations, looked at Eiji Nizuma in disbelief, and asked again and again as if to confirm, Nizuma-kun, you said you would lose. Although I am a little unwilling, if the subsequent plot of Steins Gate really develops as I thought, Nizuma Eiji did not tell Yujiro about his speculation on the plot of the manga, but looked at his editor-in-chief helplessly. Yujiro-san, the later plot of this manga by Winkuma may directly make this work a masterpiece. Relatives are coming to the house. Let me complain that I have only slept for 3 hours since yesterday. I have to go to work tomorrow, and at night. Well, according to relatives, we can't eat outside like this, it's not good for children, so I have to come back to cook and wash dishes after get off work at night. Ah, what a misfortune. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 708. After the class, the handsome middle-aged professor of Taito University, Manabu Yukawa, was surrounded by girls as usual, and failed to leave directly after class, but what was slightly different from the past was that a female student who had both the attributes of academic master and glasses girl suddenly asked a novel question. Teacher Yukawa, have you heard of the world-line convergence theory? There is no doubt that compared to the female students around who could only shout various things such as the teacher is super handsome and the teacher is super charming, this female student successfully attracted the professor's attention. World-line is a concept mentioned by Einstein in his 1905 paper on the electrodynamics of moving bodies. He called time and space four-dimensional spacetime, and the trajectory of particles in four-dimensional spacetime is the world line. As always, after using his amazing speed to popularize science to the people around him, the professor named Yukawa Manabu gently pushed his glasses, ignored the admiring eyes of the female students around him, and stared at the female student who asked the question with some curiosity, "But world-line convergence theory, is this the saying?" "Sorry, I haven't heard of it." "Which physicist proposed it?" Faced with the handsome professor's questioning, the glasses-wearing girl hesitated a little, and did not answer the professor directly. Instead, she looked at the classmates around her with hesitation. "That, actually, is. According to the world-line convergence theory you mentioned, from the name, it should be a theory related to the change of world line, right? The idea of time travel, if we can build a time machine, theoretically, we can go back to the past, yes. But even if we can travel through time and space freely, we can only follow the established trajectory." Professor Yukawa Manabu seemed not to notice the embarrassment on the face of the bespectacled girl student. He continued to speak at a fast speed and quickly told the female students around him his views, and if the proposition of world line is true, all the causes and effects related to time machines and time travel will be self-contradictory due to the existence of paradoxes. In this way, it must be excluded from the study of physics. "That's true." The bespectacled girl blinked, lowered her head a little embarrassedly, and whispered, "Sorry. Yes, I thought too simply. It's not like that. The emergence of any scientific theory is always born from all human delusions. Seeing birds flying in the sky, humans fantasize about giving themselves a pair of wings one day and being able to fly freely in the sky." The professor, who was simply telling his own thoughts, did not notice that his unconscious actions were simply harvesting the admiration and worship of the female students. In short, it is crucial for a scientist to have unique ideas. "Thank you, teacher. By the way, now can you tell me which scientist proposed the theory of world-line convergence theory?" Professor Yukawa Manabu, with a face full of curiosity and thirst for knowledge, stared at the girl with glasses through the lenses and asked seriously, "I just think this theory is very interesting. So if you know that person, can you introduce him to me?" That." The girl with glasses hesitated again. "Is it inconvenient?" Professor Yukawa Manabu asked. Professor Kawagoku's tone was somewhat regretful. "No. Just, actually." The girl with glasses finally made up her mind and told everything she knew. "Teacher, actually, I saw the term world-line convergence theory in a comic book." "Comics?" Professor Kawagoku was a little surprised by the answer of the girl with glasses. After hesitating for a moment, he slowly asked, "Have the current comics reached the level of starting to talk about this theory?" "No, teacher." The girl with glasses, who was touched by Professor Kawagoku, was a little amused and embarrassed. "I'm just disappointed by the cartoonist and I'm just a little curious about the theories proposed in the comics." "Comics?" Professor Manabu Yukawa frowned and thought for a moment, then asked the girl with glasses, "Whose cartoonist is it?" "It's the cartoonist Fengguangai Yuan Kuma." After answering Professor Manabu Yukawa's question, the girl with glasses suddenly realized it and asked in surprise, "Teacher, do you read comics too? So it's that person's work." Recalling the white-coated boy who had made an appointment with him to meet in a maid cafe, Professor Manabu Yukawa suddenly smiled. "Well, I occasionally read comics too. I can read, although most comics are completely illogical, there are some exceptions." "Eh? Could it be?" The girl with glasses noticed Professor Yukawa's smile and asked uncertainly, Teacher, Do you know the cartoonist Feng Guangai Kuma? Yes, it's someone I know. After looking at his watch, Professor Yukawa said to the female students around him, "Okay, today's discussion ends here. I didn't expect that someone as rigorous as Teacher Yukawa would actually read comics. Yes, yes, comics that can attract teachers, well, I'll go buy them and have a look later. When you read the manga, you just want to take the opportunity to get closer to Mr. Yukawa, right? Disgusting. It's not." Amid the gossip among the female students, Professor Yukawa Manabu has already left the classroom quickly with his courseware. If you pay close attention to the professor, you can notice that the professor named Yukawa Manabu is leaving in the classroom. "I was talking to someone on my mobile phone." "Oh, Professor, you've paid attention to me too. This is really, quite an honor to say." A middle school cartoonist in a white coat was talking on the phone while approaching him with a look of disgust on his face. The editor-in-chief waved his hand, and after signaling the other party to stay away, he continued to talk to Professor Yukawa Manabu with a face filled with joy. "Not only that, I also have some ideas that I would like to ask Professor for advice." Acheng. The corner of Yoshida's mouth twitched, and his eyes were filled with wonder when he looked at a certain second-year cartoonist. "Well, it's related to box theory and observer of the world line." Ignoring Yoshida's strange look, a certain middle-level cartoonist continued to talk on the phone, but, visually, Takahashi Makoto has now it's not like a crazy cartoonist, but more like a crazy scientist. "No, no, Professor, of course it's not from M-theory. HN, are you trying to fool people?" Listening to a middle school cartoonist and the professor on the other end of the phone talking about various theories and various unconscious vocabulary, Yoshida suddenly felt a little bit have no choice. "Or, are you communicating with another Chuyunibu patient that I don't know about? My beloved cat, I just had a friendly academic exchange with the professor." A middle school cartoonist who had hung up the phone couldn't help but speak after hearing the helpless complaint from his editor-in-charge. He retorted, "How much knowledge do I have? Of course you won't know if you haven't seen the Gate of Truth, my familiar cat, but the identity of the other party, my familiar cat, you will know after a little research." "Huh? Isn't he another guy with a hole in his head?" Yoshida looked at a certain middle-level cartoonist with sympathy, and reached out to pat the other person's shoulder. "Although I don't know what kind of person the other person is, he can be, Makoto, the existence you call professor, haha." Hey, my beloved cat, are you so stupid because your vision is limited by your IQ? Or are you so stupid because your IQ is limited by your vision?" A middle school cartoonist looked at him sympathetically. Looking at Yoshida, he spread his hands helplessly. "Professor Yukawa is a genuine associate professor of physics at Taito University." "Huh? Quasi-professor? Is it fake? Is it a lie? Is it a lie?" A physics professor actually had such a speculative conversation with a second-grade cartoonist? Yoshida suddenly felt that his worldview was collapsing. "No, I said it wrong." As if the disbelief on Yoshida's face wasn't enough, a certain second-level cartoonist seemed to think it was not enough, so, he added another cut. "To be precise, the associate professor was only 3 months ago. The current Professor Yukawa Manabu is a real professor. Let Professor Yukawa appear occasionally." Professor Galileo said super cutely laugh. A middle school cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 709. It is normal and scientific to trick the protagonists of comics or novels. After all, some of the fantasy things that appear in comics or novels are inherently abnormal and unscientific. As far as predicting the future is concerned, which can be called a common cheat, almost no one in reality can easily foresee the future. The reason why it is said to be almost is that it is naturally limited to the known surface world, so it is a matter of course. Exclude the inner world with all kinds of mysterious sides. A certain academic master once said that the so-called ability to predict the future is nothing more than deducing the direction of change of things according to laws and regulations based on the known and existing information and reasonable calculations of various formulas, and calculating in advance a certain future event. Point in time, calculate what is most likely to happen. In short, the ability to predict the future requires mastering a large amount of information and intelligence, integrating it, and calculating and eliminating various low-probability events in a short period of time. In other words, in addition to possessing supercomputing power, in order to obtain precognition ability, one needs to master a large amount of information and intelligence. Of course, experience and the like can also be regarded as a type of intelligence to a certain extent. Even the god who is known as the god of strategy only has the baptism of many games to hone his magic eyes that can see through the ending almost miraculously. However, for that god, what he can do is, what is foreseeable is only when it comes to strategies. By the way, there is no pure and perfect existence in the world, there are also various flaws in various abilities that can be called plug-ins. As far as the ability to predict the future is concerned, excluding some unscientific brands, if a high-tech product like a mobile phone is really confronted with something as simple as a brick, the result will usually be kidney pain. To put it simply, the more sophisticated the product, the more precise it is. The machine is more susceptible to damage. Therefore, the most fatal thing about the ability to predict the future is that the calculations are too precise, and can even be said to be so precise that no mistakes are allowed. The slightest deviation may make the future that has been seen originally change happens. In the manga Steins Gate, the male protagonist Rentaro Okabe uses D-Male, an apparently scientific but actually very fantasy existence, to create something no less than precognition future ability. But this ability also has flaws. Previously, when Rentaro was in the fearless and furious state, he unscrupulously asked the members of the Future Items Research Institute to send D-Mail to the past to give some information to relevant people around him in order to change it. Some things in the future, for example, let a certain cat lady maid who is also a middle-aged girl send a message to his father who is not dead in the past, changing the fate of his father's death. That middle-class cat girl did what a normal person would do, and there is no need to accuse her of being selfish. Let's talk about a guy who gave up because he didn't have the opportunity to create something equivalent to resurrection of the dead. How pathetic is it? However, Rentaro did not realize it at that time, but just this piece of information would have a huge impact on the changes in the future, until Rentaro saw Akihabara, which is known as the origin of cute culture. Only after becoming the largest electrical appliance mall in the city did I feel a little uneasy. So understand, regarding the shortcomings of the hero's ability in the manga Steins Gate, it is that after sending the D-Mail, while changing the established trajectory of fate, he also created a new trajectory for fate. That is the well-known, famous butterfly effect theory. In the last month of serialization, the male protagonist Rentaro has been using the ability of D-Mail to keep going back to the past time, trying to change the fate of Mayuri destined to die. As Rentaro tries again and again, the reader failed, and the reader who had been silently paying attention to Rentaro's actions as an observer finally realized the truth about Mayuri's death-destined destiny under the guidance of Rentaro. If the main theme of the comic Steins Gate only revolves around the butterfly effect theory, then Rentaro's repeated attempts should also affect the future due to an accidental sentence or action, allowing Mayu to its better to avoid the fate of certain death. But what if we add the theory of world line convergence to the theory based on butterfly effect? Mayuri's death is a destined outcome. In other words, no matter how Rentaro changes or tries, he can't change. At most, it can only delay Mayuri's death slightly. That guy Aiken is really... Yoshida put down the comic manuscript in his hand and suddenly felt an inexplicable chill. He leaned against the wall subconsciously, huddled up, and sighed in a low voice, "He is crazy, even that is not enough to describe that guy. How cruel." Using the serialization for a whole month, Rentaro failed again and again, and the arrogant middle school scientist saw his childhood sweetheart die in front of him again and again, in order to tell the comics clearly through the content of the serialization. The matching effect of the two major theories of butterfly effect and world line convergence in Stein's Gate. So, since the episode about Mayuri's death, has a certain middle-class cartoonist already started laying out the plot? No. To be exact, the layout should have started as early as the beginning when the male protagonist Rentaro used the D-male ability in the comic. Shit, Yoshida, who discovered the brutal layout ability of the comic Steins Gate, immediately looked through the content of the previous comic Steins Gate, and suddenly burst out with swear words regardless of the occasion. This damn layout, that guy Cheng is simply crazy. So, when faced with this situation, what choice will you make? The king of Black Flame, looking at Nazuma Ag sitting cross-legged in front of him, a certain Chuyunibana manga artist with a smile that can be read as pleasure and written as bad taste on his face, whispered, "I am super curious about your choice, the king of Black Flame." While dragging out a nasal sound, he grabbed his hair with both hands and shook it left and right. Obviously, Nazuma Ag was stumped by the difficult choice question raised by a certain Chuyunibana manga artist. Ah, it's super difficult. So what's your choice, Mr. Hawinkuma? Tisk, you can't answer it, so you change the subject? King of Black Flame, you can't do that. A certain Chuyunibun cartoonist seemed helpless to Nazuma Ag, who was already struggling to the point of rolling on the ground. He spread his hands and sighed, "To be honest, I don't know how to choose myself. You know, there is a similar question in Zhongzhou, but it is listed at the top of the list of the most difficult questions in history." Eh? What's that question? Nazuma Ag immediately looked at a certain Chuyunibun cartoonist with curiosity, and said confidently, "Maybe I can answer it." Huh? King of Black Flame, I don't think you'll be a good choice. A certain Chuyunibun cartoonist looked a little strange. After thinking for a moment, he seemed to suddenly realize something and said with a smile, "But it's better for you to be prepared earlier. So, if your wife and mother fall into the water together and you can only save one person, who will you choose to save?" After thinking for a long time, Nazuma Ag showed a depressed expression on his face and said unhappily, "Teacher Hawinkuma, after the next episode is serialized, you will definitely be cursed by the readers. It's not my fault." A certain Chuyunibun cartoonist spread his hands innocently, "Everything is the choice of Steins Gate." A middle school cartoonist. Author, Mao Do Sde Mao. Chapter 710. Living in the human world, in order to adapt to the world, you will eventually have to make changes. Question, is it more difficult to change yourself to adapt to the world? Or is it more difficult to give birth to the self-awareness I have to change to adapt to the world? The answer is, becoming the god of the new world is actually the most difficult choice, no doubt about it. Waving the brush while mumbling to himself and answering questions that are unclear but sound very philosophical, he would do this, maybe only a certain Chuyunibana cartoonist? After all, when Nizuma Ag was drawing the comics, he only made meaningless sounds at most. Whether it was the editor or the cartoonist, he was well known as the king of onomatopoeia, that's all. But the only pity is that a certain Chuyunibiao cartoonist is staying at home alone at the moment, so there is no tsundere lady's complaints, no assistant with sympathetic eyes, and no weekly editor-in-chief to provide pleasure for entertainment. Although the guy Black Flame King complained. During the break, a certain Chuyunibiao cartoonist looked up and saw the messed up comics on the table, and couldn't help but smile with satisfaction, but after hearing that the comics were completed, he was able to rush here as soon as possible. Task tisk tisk, it's really not honest. Getting up and sorting out the comics that were messed up by Nazuma Ag, a certain Chuyunibiao cartoonist fell into deep thought. After all, like a certain priest who pursues pleasure, when humans embark on the road of pursuing pleasure, they will always fall into deep thought easily. This is the will of fate, or, This is actually thinking about how to make yourself more pleasure. My cat servant. Coming back from a brief meditation, a certain Chuanibiao cartoonist looked up at the wall clock and complained with some dissatisfaction, "You clearly agreed on a time with me, but now, you dare to be late. It's decided." Quickly standing up and picking up the magic sword leaning against the table, the Chuanibiao cartoonist slowly drew out the sword, waved it 2 or 3 times towards the void, then stood by the door and began to mutter. "If my cat servant uses traffic jam as an excuse for being late, then use sword slash. If my cat servant uses missed the train as an excuse for being late, then use cassock slash. Of course, if my cat servant uses I lost my way on the road of life as an excuse for being late." The Chuanibiao cartoonist suddenly stopped waving the magic sword, tilted his head and thought for a moment, then used secret skill swallow return. "As for the possibility that my cat triggers 3 sword skills at the same time. Haha, how is that possible? Don't be too greedy." Just when a certain Chuyunabaku manga artist was thinking about how to get pleasure from Yoshida more efficiently, Yoshida finally rang the doorbell. "Sorry, Chen, I'm late." After opening the door, Yoshida did not observe the state of the Chuyunabaku manga artist at the moment, but explained to himself, "Because of the traffic jam on the road, I missed the train, so, Looking at the Chuyunabaku manga artist posing a sword-drawing posture with his eyes fixed on him, the editor-in-chief of a certain weekly magazine was so scared that he broke out in a cold sweat, but he couldn't continue to say the words on his lips. "My cat, is this your last words?" After looking up at his editor-in-chief, the Chuyunabaku manga artist began to adjust his breathing. It was obvious. Sword skills had been charged. "In this life, do you have anything else to say?" Hey, wait. Wait," looking at the posture of a certain Chuyunabaku manga artist who was ready to kill him, Yoshida frantically looked around for a position to avoid the fatal blow, while his brain was working rapidly, trying to stimulate the non-existent protagonist halo in himself and use the mouth shield to defend against the enemy. "I know it's not good for me to be late, but the real reason I'm late is because I lost my way on the road of life." Based on Yoshida's experience of escaping death many times, when he gave such a Chuyunabaku explanation, he would definitely be ridiculed by a certain Chuyunabaku manga artist. In other words, at most he would just endure a wave of ridicule and contempt in his mind, which was definitely a big win compared to facing physical pain. But unfortunately, Yoshida, the editor-in-chief of a certain weekly magazine, did not hear about the settings of the triggering of the sword skill by a certain Chuyunabaku manga artist before. My great prophecy was successfully performed? Or, is this the blessing of the legendary words come true, "Destiny is in my hands"? Somewhat surprised that Yoshida actually completely triggered all of his settings for the sword skill, the Chuyunabaku manga artist was stunned at first, then immediately took a deep breath and shouted at Yoshida. "No matter what. Anyway, my cat, wake up." "Yeah, the wailing of the editor-in-chief of a certain weekly magazine resounded in the empty room. By the way, was that the talent bonus of being the protagonist just now? Looking at his hands in disbelief, the Chuyunabaku manga artist's eyes were full of confusion. "I actually succeeded? The legendary secret technique swallow return, I actually succeeded in performing it." "Use your sister," Yoshida, whose clothes had obvious scratches, said angrily with a gloomy face. That's right, he was just late, but he was almost killed. No matter who it was, he couldn't let his anger dissipate in a short time, right? "Aiken, what are you doing today? How dare you talk to me in this tone, my cat?" Although Yoshida complained in a bad tone, the voice of a certain Chuyunabaku cartoonist was actually louder. "I am now in the state of destiny bonus. Now I am absolutely sure that I can use 1,000 cuts on you without hurting you at all, my cat. Do you want to try it?" Noticing the fierce light in the eyes of a certain Chuyunabaku cartoonist and the look of expectation on his face, the editor-in-chief of a certain weekly magazine was silent for a moment and decisively admitted his defeat. I'm not interested in being a test subject, where's the comic manuscript? Tisk. You're really not good, my cat. The middle school manga artist gently tapped the table with the scabbard, and raised his chin. The comic manuscript is on the table, my cat. You are the editor-in-chief, but after learning that the content of the new chapter was completed, you came later than the guy Black Flame King. Tisk tisk tisk. I'm really sorry for coming late, bastard. After angrily scolding the middle school manga artist, Yoshida decisively picked up the comic manuscript on the table and began to read it, but he was a little excited in his heart. It's really exciting to pretend to do that and then run away. To be honest, Yoshida is more curious about the content of the comic manuscript in his hand than the words that the middle school manga artist may mock and complain about himself next. A certain cat received the mayor today. The mayor, cough cough, is not excited, but he is very tired, bastard. In short, dear readers, please rest early, good night. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 711. Ever since the dramatic twist in the comic Steins Gate appeared, Yoshida's interest in this comic has increased significantly, not just because this may be the last comic strip by a middle-class cartoonist, but more importantly, this comic is just like what a middle-level cartoonist said before. The plot in the middle and later stages is really awesome. After many experiments, Okabe Rentaro may have found a way to save Mayuri. The reason why he is not sure is naturally because of the ideas of a certain middle-class cartoonist, which normal humans cannot guess. After all, a story about a crazy god like the manga Madoka can only be experienced once in your lifetime. In order for Mayuri to avoid the world line of certain death, she must withdraw the actions that have changed the world bit by bit, in other words, withdraw the D-mail that she once sent. In other words, Rentaro Okabe once had the bitter consequences of letting the members of Future Items Research Institute use D-mail in a rage, but now Rentaro Okabe can only bear it by himself. This development is not good. At the beginning, Yoshida was just surprised. It turns out that the previous serialization was just a foreshadowing, but after seeing the manga manuscript in his hand, Yoshida I feel a little uneasy. Because of the plot of this episode, Rentaro wants to convince the person who withdraws the D-mail target, that middle-class catgirl maid. 2. The girl who allowed her father to complete the feat of resurrecting the dead by sending a D-mail. If you want to save your friends, you must let your father who has been resurrected die again, and if you want to maintain the status quo, you must let your friend Mayuri enter the fate of destined to die. If the plot is just like this, then maybe most people think that the second-level catgirl maid will choose her father. After all, in the comics, the second-level cat lady maid is where her father is not dead, and she are that world line that Mayuri is not familiar with. Compared with the lost family love, it is not a familiar friendship. The result is self-evident, although it is a bit cruel. Maybe this is the reality. But a certain middle-level cartoonist did not let the plot of the comic fall into the cliché, but added wild and unconstrained ideas, of course, for Yoshida who is observing the comics, and the readers who will observe the comics in the future. It is a crazy idea. That is to let the second-grade cat lady maid suddenly come into contact with some memories of the original world line. After his father passed away unfortunately, he used the maid cafe to introduce cute culture to Akihabara. Every bit of cuteness while working with Mayuri. The daily life of middle school students with Rentaro Okabe. The switch between illusion and reality tormented the middle school catgirl maid, causing this eldest lady to have unspeakable contradictions. Therefore, when he saw the middle two catgirl maid propose to keep Okabe Rentaro for discussion, Yoshida let out a long sigh. In fact, no matter what choice he made, for the cute middle two catgirl maid, the most cruel thing will happen. Choosing one's own father, for the second-year catgirl maid, is no less than killing one's best friend with one's own hands, and it even involves the friendship between oneself and Rintaro and others, but choosing Mayuri's side also means that thinking that he would kill his father with his own hands. For the second-grade catgirl maid, the dilemma of choosing between family love and friendship is simply the most cruel test in life. So, father or a friend? This is a problem for the middle school catgirl maid. When Yoshida flipped through the last page of the manga, he discovered that the manga did not reveal the final choice of the second-level catgirl maid. Judging from the rhythm of the plot, the result should be in the next chapter. But this kind of blocking of the plot should be said to have been done for a long time. Where are the remaining cartoon manuscripts? He looked up at the cartoonist who was drawing the cartoon manuscript. After much hesitation, the editor-in-chief of a certain weekly couldn't help but ask. My beloved cat, haven't you been satisfied yet? You can't be too greedy. The answer, of course, was the unceremonious ridicule of a middle-grade cartoonist. I'm still drawing the comic draft. By the way, isn't the weight in your hand enough to serialize one chapter? Okay. Yoshida's mouth twitched, then he put away the comic manuscripts, stood up and came to a certain second-grade cartoonist, and said, Chen, you know what I'm talking about, and you also know that I want to know. What is, even though the next chapter of the comic has not been completed yet, Chen, you have actually already thought about the development of the subsequent plot of the comic. Spoilers are prohibited. Putting his index finger to his lips, a certain middle-grade cartoonist squinted his eyes and smiled happily. Of course, if you can collect all 7 Dragon Balls in my familiar cat, maybe Shenlong can fulfill your wish. Chen, you don't want to say it at all, right? Yoshida stared at a certain middle-level cartoonist with great hatred. After pondering for a moment, he suddenly changed the subject. Speaking of which, Aiken, you haven't thought about it yet. That's right. Actually, if you think about it carefully, no matter what Phyllis chooses, she will be the one who gets hurt in the end, and the readers will be dissatisfied. This kind of low-level provocation, tisk, my cat, you are so childish. A certain Chuyunabeka cartoonist directly exposed Yoshida's idea and mocked him again without any hesitation, and it's obviously you who want to see it, but you have to pretend to be the reader. Tisk, if my cat, you were a little more honest. Ah-Cheng, please, I want to know the subsequent plot development. Before the Chuyunabeka cartoonist finished speaking, Yoshida immediately put his hands together, bowed and said in a sincere tone, speaking of which, Yoshida, where is your modesty and integrity as the editor-in-chief of the weekly magazine? Even if you ask me like this. A certain Chuyunabeka cartoonist seemed to enjoy the pleasure generated by Yoshida's request. After deliberately delaying for a while, he slowly refused, I won't tell you. Just give up, my cat. Tisk, if Yoshida knew that a certain Chuyunabeka cartoonist would refuse his request, he would never abandon his integrity just now. Speaking of which, my beloved cat, what do you think of the plot of this episode? Looking at the indignant Yoshida, a certain Chuyunabeka cartoonist suddenly said, before, the guy Black Flame King, after reading the comic manuscript of this episode, complained that I would be cursed by the readers, but I don't think it should be that exaggerated. Huh? Ah-Cheng, what kind of person are you? Don't you know what's going on? Yoshida turned around and picked up the comic manuscript, slapped the comic manuscript on the front page with his right hand, and roared at a certain Chuyunabeka cartoonist, look at the plot you designed. Yes, no matter from the creativity or the plot foreshadowing, I have nothing to say, but the rationality can accept it, but it does not mean that the emotions can accept it. You tortured Phyllis like that in the comics. It would be strange if you didn't suffer the criticism of readers. Compared to me. A certain Chuyunabeka cartoonist leaned back in his chair, pondered for a moment, and then slowly said, my beloved cat, I think the real horror, the scary ones, are actually you humans. We humans. Well, After realizing that a certain Chuyunabaku manga artist treated him as a non-human, Yoshida paused for a moment, then immediately raised his voice and angrily retorted, "Aiken, you are not qualified to say such things. No, my beloved cat, you didn't understand what I meant." A certain Chuyunabaku manga artist spread his hands helplessly, his eyes moved to the comic manuscript in Yoshida's hand, and after staring at it for a long time, he said with emotion, "Since you already know that Phyllis-chan is facing a dilemma, and no matter what choice she makes, she will have to endure pain, then why are you so impatient to know the subsequent developments?" I'm because. Want to know the subsequent developments of the comics? No, my beloved cat, you actually don't want to know this. A certain Chuyunabaku manga artist suddenly sneered, and the smile that was originally full of pleasure on his face was replaced by contempt and disdain. If Ferris chooses to save Mayuri, then after seeing such a result, you will not be able to help but have thoughts such as it's really too much for a guy to sacrifice his father to save his friend, and vice versa. I won't have such thoughts, Yoshida immediately retorted. My beloved cat, don't be so excited. After all, your thoughts don't matter to me at all. A certain Chuyunabaku cartoonist signaled his editor-in-chief to calm down a little, and then continued to speak in an orderly manner. I just think that humans always like to look for opportunities to take the opportunity to stand on the moral high ground to accuse others. It's actually normal to feel happy by observing the misfortunes of others. After all, humans always hate to see others better than themselves. In the final analysis, humans are the most likely to have jealous emotions. Ahem, the title of the next chapter is definitely not the 7 Deadly Sins, don't worry. A middle school cartoonist. Author, MaleProtagonist Male. Chapter 712. With the recent serialization of the manga Steins Gate, to be precise, it should be since the divine twist of Mayuri's first death that the whole manga suddenly became popular among readers. Plot analysis, emotional choices, the possibility of successfully saving Mayuri, almost all the topics that readers can discuss in the manga have been analyzed and discussed one by one. This means that the manga Steins Gate has been recognized by readers. However, for the weekly editor Yoshida, this is not the only news worth celebrating. What really shocked the black-bellied and venomous Yoshida was the ability of a certain middle school cartoonist to lay out the overall plot of the manga Steins Gate, or in other words, the brutal control of the entire manga by a certain middle school cartoonist. In many works, especially those novels or comics with longer length and longer serialization time, some wonderful character settings and plot foreshadowing may appear at the beginning, but as the serialization time increases and the original author's later ideas for the entire work are conceived, it is easy to forget or abandon the foreshadowing plots that made readers remember them in the early stage. This is a very common thing. Even for several well-known comics currently being serialized in weekly magazines, similar behavior has occurred. However, in the comic Steins Gate, a certain Chuyunabaku cartoonist did not forget or abandon those plot foreshadowings and character foreshadowings. Of course, if it was only to this extent, Yoshida would not be too surprised. After all, as early as when the comic Full Metal Alchemist was serialized, the editor-in-chief of a certain weekly magazine had already witnessed the brutal layout ability of a certain Chuyuni cartoonist. It can be said that in the comic Full Metal Alchemist, it was because the two brothers Edward embarked on a journey to find a way to restore their bodies that they had scenes of encounters and interactions with others, discovered the hidden conspiracy, and integrated reinforcements from all sides in the final battle to defeat the little man in the bottle who was already worthy of being called God. Speaking of which, when the comic Full Metal Alchemist was serialized, Yoshida really didn't think so much. All the above content was what Yoshida saw on the internet later. However, the comic Steins Gate that is being serialized now is different. Since the beginning, whenever the male protagonist Okabe Rentaro appears in the comic, there will be various Chuyuni settings, which will make readers remember, and even leave embarrassing deep impressions such as I am most afraid of the sudden silence of the air. Settings such as machines and spies, as well as delusions such as fighting against a dark organization that wants to dominate the world, always appear in the daily conversations of mad scientist Hao Wing-Kuma. However, before the plot of Mayuri's first death unfolded, who would have thought that all that Okabe Rentaro said was not a conspiracy theory caused by the delusion of being persecuted, but a real thing? The daily dialogue that was originally just a high-level scientist's high-level power was transferred to reality. This control of turning delusions into reality undoubtedly shocked and amazed Yoshida. Of course, compared to Yoshida, even a certain cartoonist who was vaguely prepared was still frightened by the powerful and brutal control ability of a certain cartoonist after reading the 3 recent episodes. As expected, Eiji Nyaizuma closed the weekly comic book with both hands. His expression was no longer as relaxed and cheerful as usual. Instead, he was filled with loneliness and unwillingness. It's the same result as I guessed at the beginning. Nyaizuma-kun, seeing that Eiji Nyaizuma was obviously in a bad state, the editor-in-chief Yujiro on the side was a little worried. After all, since he and the former editor-in-chief personally invited Eiji Nyaizuma, this was the first time Yujiro saw the other party look so disappointed. Yujiro-san, I lost this time. Although there was unwillingness and disappointment in his tone, Eiji Nyaizuma was Eiji Nyaizuma. Soon, as if nothing had happened, he smiled and said to his editor-in-chief, although the manga Steins Gate has not yet been completed, I have already expected the result. Editor-in-chief Yujiro said it was difficult to continue Eiji Nyaizuma's words. I originally thought that I could suppress the manga Steins Gate and let Mr. Hao Wing-Kuma give up some of his thoughts of retirement. Eiji Nyaizuma threw the comic book aside and stretched out his hands. With his hands on the table and his eyes looking at the ceiling, he said, I didn't expect that I still couldn't seize the last chance, what a pity. Nyaizuma-kun, admit defeat now. Yujiro, who didn't know how to continue the topic, could only bite the bullet and persuade him after noticing that the atmosphere was getting weirder. Maybe it's too early. Yujiro-san is really an idiot, because of someone. The originally kind and upright Nyaizuma Eiji was also led astray. The evidence is that even though he realized that his editor-in-chief was persuading him with good intentions, Nyaizuma Eiji subconsciously mocked him. Just after reading the latest episode, I knew I lost this time. But judging from the performance of the weekly serialization, Yujiro felt that Nyaizuma Eiji was a little pessimistic, and immediately tried to cite data to prove his point. Nyaizuma-kun, you haven't lost yet. So, Yujiro-san, don't you understand? Eiji, the new wife, suddenly shouted loudly, not only interrupting Yujiro's unfinished words, but also startling him. This is not the difference in grades, nor is it the ranking of the comics. What I mean by losing is my ability to control the plot of the comics. The ability to control comics, Yujiro, who was a little puzzled, repeated, and after pondering for a moment, he nodded and said, indeed, from the perspective of the ability to control the plot of comics, The Steins of Stone written by Mr. Kumamoto of the Phoenix Academy is the plot layout of Gate is really amazing. It's not just about being awesome. Nyaizuma Eiji suddenly stood up, took down an issue of the weekly magazine from the bookcase next to the desk, quickly flipped to a certain page, and spread it out in front of Yujiro. Yujiro-san, you didn't pay attention carefully before. Have you read the serialization of the manga Steins Gate? Now look at the content of this chapter. So what, the early stage of this manga, ahem, well, it's not my type. Without denying Eiji Nitsuma's point of view, Yujiro smiled awkwardly, and then followed Eiji Nitsuma's request and began to observe the comics. However, after just roughly browsing 2 or 3 pages, Yujiro immediately opened his eyes and exclaimed, this is a previous serial, eh? How is that possible? Oh, it seems Yujiro-san, you have also noticed it. Nyaizuma Eiji put away the weekly magazine in his hand, then picked up the latest issue of the weekly magazine that he had thrown aside not long ago, and said to Yujiro, "This Yuichiro-san, you must have read the content, otherwise you would never have said that expression just now." "Yes, but this, how is this possible?" Yujiro seemed to be unwilling to accept the reality, and looked at Eiji Nizuma for help. "Ninzuma-kun, your cartoonist's layout of comics, or your ability to control, can you actually accomplish this kind of thing? If it's the main line, I can actually say." Eiji Nizuma looked at the comic in his hand, his face full of wonder, "But it's just a passerby character who hasn't appeared many times. Phoenix teacher Yin Jujhen was actually able to deliberately arrange a plot, and it was a plot that intersected with the main plot, unless it was planned in advance. No, even if it was conceived in advance, I can't tell." Compared to this, Yujiro stared at Nizuma Eiji with strange eyes. "Speaking of Nizuma-kun, what I'm more curious about is, why do you have such a deep memory for this character who only appeared in a few episodes? Even the conversation with the leading actor during the appearance, you remember clearly?" "Because the bald one said." After hearing Yujiro's question, Eiji Shinzuma suddenly had a look of resentment that shouldn't have appeared on his face. "When I saw the character setting of bald, I was reminded of the comic book One Punch Man that was actively completed by Mr. Kuma from the Phoenix Academy but was not actually completed. Since the serialization of the comic One Punch Man was completed, whenever bald characters appear in other comics, readers will think of the bald-caped man who said, 'I am just a hero motivated by interest.' What is this about the comics? What do you like about One Punch Man? Or is it resentment towards a certain middle-class cartoonist?" "Okay, I understand," Yujiro nodded in agreement. Therefore, Yujiro instantly accepted the explanation from Eiji Shinzuma. "To be honest, the plot of Stone Gate is difficult to analyze. A certain cat can only express his personal understanding. For readers who have not read the original work, go read this masterpiece first, at least 3 times. By the way, a certain cat reviewed it and found that the comics mentioned in the article seemed to have corresponding events in reality. When I was writing Tide and Tiger, a remake appeared. When I mentioned Hunter, Togashi Old Thief actually resumed publication. When I was preparing to write Stone Gate, the new series started again. The only regret is that One Punch, it only revealed the news about the second season, but there is no work. Sure enough, a certain cat's great prophecy technique hasn't been mastered yet.